Okay, everybody, a good Erev Shabbos to all. Good to see some of you. Vayadaber Adinoy Moshe Lemar Dabar Alarm Velbanav Lemar Kaisevarechu as Bnei Yisrael Amar Lahem Yivarechecha Adinoy v'Yishmerecha Yoir Adinoy Pana v'Elecha v'Chuneka Yisa Adinoy Pana v'Elecha v'Yasem Lecha Shalom v'Samweh Shemi Al Bnei Yisrael v'Ani Avarachem. We start off every week with the Birchat Kohanim, the blessings that God gave to Moses to pass on to Aaron, to pass on to the Jewish people in God's name. So it's not the Kohen that is blessing, it's the Kohen that's giving forth the blessings that God gave to be given through him. This week's portion, the portion of Korach, will deal with this fundamental issue of what is this business with there being Kohanim? Why is there some hierarchy? There's a Kohen, there's a Levite, there's an Israelite. Why can't we all just be the same? What's wrong with everyone just being equal? The story of Korach, this week's portion, it's a difficult portion. It really is. It's quite emotional. It's painful to read. It comes so soon after the episode of the spies, which was a disaster. And like the story of the spies, it drives your emotion. And at least for me, perhaps for you as well, I end up with this feeling of compassion for Moses and Aaron, and this feeling of frustration with the Jewish people. Maybe because I'm named after Moshe, maybe because I'm a descendant of Aaron, maybe because of that I have this sensitivity towards them. But really, when you read through last week's portion, this week's portion, and again, the complaints and the attack on them, and they're such nice guys. They're really nice people, and they keep getting it from our ancestors. So I'd also like you to keep in mind that in defense of the Jewish people, life in the wilderness had within it two opposite components. On one hand, they had everything taken care of for them. They didn't have to worry about a thing. Think about it. They had food from heaven. They got water from a rock. They got protection from a cloud of glory. They got heat at night from a cloud of fire, a pillar of fire. They had the leadership of Moses. You don't get better than that. They had revelation directly from God. No one else ever had that. Then they had a tabernacle. They saw open and revealed miracles every single day. Think about what life must have been like for them. So why all these crises? One crisis after the next. And perhaps it's the other opposite of the story. And the fact is that they're in the wilderness. You're not home. And when you're not in a home, there's a sense of a lack of stability. Yeah, today I had food. Today I had water. Today the rock gave forth water. How do I know the rock is going to give forth water tomorrow? How do I know the food from heaven is going to fall tomorrow? Today we have protection. What about tomorrow? Today we have Moses, but he's an elderly man. What if he dies? What's going to happen to us? We'll be left stuck here in the wilderness. Today we have peace, but who knows who's going to attack us during the night? So when you're not home, when you don't have a home and you're in the wilderness, on top of that, you're coming out of slavery for 210 years, which on its own will make you need therapy. So you take the 210 years of slavery and you add to that this living in a condition, this temporary condition. It's hard. You know, we're struggling, and we're all struggling with 4 months of living on a different plane. Our lives have not been the same the last 4 months. And maybe when the announcements first started 4 months ago, we thought, okay, we'll survive the next week or two like this. And then we'll survive maybe another third week or a fourth week. But we're over 4 months right now living in a very strange way. And you feel how the panic begins to set in. It's not that you're getting used to it. The opposite is true. You're getting frustrated. Hey, but you still have a house, right? You still have food on your table, but yet there's something about your life that puts you on edge. Let's think about that as we think about the Jewish people in the wilderness. They went on 40 years of not being in a regular condition. I also want to add this point in defense of the Jewish people of that generation, that the crisis that we read about last week of the spies, the crisis that we're reading about this week, the crisis of Korach. The crisis that we're going to read about, the crisis that dealt with Pinchas. The crisis of where's the water, where's the beef, all of the complaints that took place, all took place in the first year after Exodus. It all happens in that first year. After that first year is over, the Torah will actually skip to year number 40, 40th year in the wilderness. So we'll get year number 1 and we'll get year number 40. There are 38 years in between that we don't hear anything about. Why not? Because nothing happened during those 38 years bad. They were living the way they were supposed to live. They did what they were supposed to do. They were all good years. They figured it out. So there is this transition of that first year where we do have to at some point forgive such behavior because it's the unknown. It's not knowing what's happening. It's being stuck in the wilderness and not knowing where you're going, when you're leaving. That can play a role on your psyche. So this transition that takes place, this transition of generations that will take place, because in year number 40, we're going to be talking to a different generation. We're going to be talking to the children of the Exodus. The children of Exodus were far more obedient than the adults that lived during the Exodus. That's the background. Let's take a look at the Korach story, the Korach rebellion. This is a rebellion against Moses. And the commentaries describe Korach's personality and his actions. And it gives us this complex and contradictory picture. You see, Korach was not an ordinary rabble-rouser. We had the Dasan and the Aviram that make trouble every possible time. Korach is a different breed. He was a leading member of the Kahati tribe. Kahati comes from Levi. So he's from the tribe of Levi, and within the tribe of Levi, there were 3 groups, Gershon, Kahat, and Merari. He came from the most prestigious of the Levite family. And joining him in this mutiny against Moses and Aaron were 250 men of Israel, and the Torah describes them, leaders of the community. These were called the men of the renown. They weren't your ordinary people. These were leaders. And they joined in this revolt against Moses. Korach's difference with Moses was an ideological difference. It was driven by the way in which he understood Israel's relationship with God and the manner in which he felt the nation ought to be structured. Yet Korach is regarded as the father of all rabble-rousers for all of history. His very name is synonymous with disharmony. His name is synonymous with conflict. The Talmud goes so far as to proclaim that anyone who engages in divisiveness and transgresses a divine prohibition, as it is written, and he shall not be as Korach and his company. So when Ethics of Our Fathers wants to say, don't be involved in divisiveness, they'll say, like Korach, don't be like him. So his name is forever used by us. So there's obviously something at the heart of Korach's contentions that is the essence of all disunity, not just this one story, but all disunity. What exactly did Korach want? His arguments against Moses and Aaron seem filled with contradiction, as I said. On one hand, he seems to challenge the very institution of the priesthood. He's challenging the idea that there should be such a thing as a Kohen. Why? As he says, the entire community is holy. Every Jew is holy. Every Jew is chosen. And God is within every single one of us. We each have a neshama. We each have a soul. So why do you raise yourselves over the congregation of God? How do you guys go ahead and say, you're the Kohanim, you're the priests? We're all priests. Moses divided the people of Israel into different classes of holiness, right? The Israelites were the ordinary. The Levites and the Kohens, these were the priests, and these were higher up on the pyramid. And above all on the pyramid was the Kohen Gadol, the high priest. And who did he give that position to? To his own brother. Some nepotism going on here. So the regular Israelites, the farmers and the merchants and the craftsmen and the soldiers and the statesmen of Israel, they were to pursue the normal existence of physical man, a life and vocation that involve the bulk of a person's time and talents in the material world. The tribe of Levi, however, they were separated, and they were distinguished by God from the community of Israel to be the ones to bring everyone closer to God, to serve as the spiritual leaders, as the priests, to instruct everyone how to follow the law, how to bring the offering in the temple, how to come closer to God. And within the tribe of Levi itself, we have the Levites and the Kohanim, and as I mentioned, and then there is the high priest himself. And yet Korach seems to be objecting to this spiritual hierarchy. From the Moses response, Moses says, it is not enough for you that the God of Israel has distinguished you from the community of Israel, that you also desire the priesthood. From the Moses response, we begin to see that Korach was not just against the hierarchy, but he was against, why did you pick your brother? What's wrong with me being the high priest? And this paradox appears time and time again in various accounts of Korach's mutiny in the commentaries. Korach tries to come across as the champion of equality. He rails against a class system that categorizes levels of holiness within the community. Many could understand that. We're all equal, we're all one. But yet in the very same breath, he contends that if there's going to be a hierarchy, I'm the more worthy candidate to be the high priesthood. But one second, you just said there shouldn't be any high priesthood. But if there's going to be, it should be me. Let's try to analyze. Korach's point. You've gone too far, he says. The whole community is holy, every one of them, and God is with them. And why then do you set yourself above the Lord's assembly? At the heart of his challenge, as I mentioned, is equality. Equality sounds like a very Jewish idea, right? Thomas Jefferson is at his most biblical when he writes in the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Where did Jefferson get that from? He got it from the Torah. He got it from the book of Genesis, that God creates all men equal. And Korach is tuning into that Thomas Jefferson aspect. All men are equal, so why do we have hierarchy? Why is there a Kohen starting his sermon with Yevarechecha Hashem v'yishmerecha, giving Birchas Kohanim? Why shouldn't anyone be able to do that? But of course, Korach does not mean what he says. He claims to be opposed to the very institution of leadership, but at the same time, he wants to be the leader. All are equal, but some are more equal than others. Anyone remember where that comes from? It comes from Animal Farm, right? Everyone is equal, but there's some that are just a little more equal than the other. That's what Korach is saying here. We're all equal, but I should be a little bit higher in the equal. There is on the face of it this compelling logic to what he says. Okay, if you think about, before he gets into the ego that it should be me, didn't God say to the Jewish people, the atem tiyuli, even if you don't know Hebrew, follow along the words with me, and you shall be to me mamleches, a kingdom, the next word, kohanim. You should all be kohanim. That's what the verse says. God says it in the Torah. You shall be to me a kingdom of priests. So if we're all supposed to be kohanim, why did Moses say only those are the descendants from Aaron, and only these will be the Levites? Why should there be priests? Why should there be a high priest? You find later the military hero in our history, in Jewish history, named Gideon. He lived in the era of the judges. And he said, I will not rule over you, nor will my son rule over you. The Lord will rule over you. You don't need someone to rule over you. God's ruling over all of us. If God rules over all of us, none of us should have the right to rule of the other. God is the boss, and God is the boss equally to all of us. Why then should there be this life-appointed Moses-type leader, right? He's not elected. He's a leader for life, rather than what happened in the days of the judges. In the days of the judges, the individuals, the figures that you read about, these were charismatic figures that take their role in our history. But it's interesting that when their story ends, they go back to an anonymous life. It's not that they became a leader and they remained a leader. They did their thing, they did their part, their role, and then they went back to being ishmegegi like the rest of us. You know, even in biblical stories, the story of Pinchas, yeah, he was a hero for that particular day, but after that, we don't really hear much of him. Kalev, who was one of the spies that went in together with Joshua from the two of the spies that said good things about Israel. We don't hear much about him. He played his role, and then he went back to being an anonymous person. Didn't Samuel the prophet warn the people of the dangers of appointing a king? Samuel was against the idea when they said, we want a king. We want to have like the British the royalty. We like the idea of Queen Elizabeth having birthday parties and marches and parades. It looks beautiful, and the coaches and the horses. So Samuel says, you think you want a king. He's going to take your sons and make them serve with his chariots and horses, and they will run in front of his chariots. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive groves. And when that day comes, you'll cry out for relief from the king you have chosen, but the Lord's not going to answer you. You guys have it so good that God is your king, and yet you're demonstrating that you want a king. So we see Samuel also seems to be against this idea of power. Because you give someone power, they're going to abuse power. So why here do we have that God seemingly appoints Moses and Aaron with something that later is discouraged of the Jewish people, having someone with such power? If you study the story of Korach, you know that he challenges Moses with a series of questions. And one of the questions that he challenged with is he dressed up some of the 250 men that joined in this revolt. And he dressed them up in completely blue garments, blue wool. And he asks the question, tell me something. If someone is wearing a garment that's completely blue, do they still have to have the tzitzit? The garments that we wear, the tzitzit, which is like the talus that we wear under our garments, and the talus itself. So in biblical commandment that we're supposed to have one of the threads should be blue. And when we see that blue thread, we're going to remember things. But what if it's all blue, says Korach, do we need to still have one blue thread if the whole garment is already blue? Everything is blue. And Moses says, yes, it still would require tzitzis, to which Korach laughed. Why did Korach ask this question about the blue and they dressed in the blue? Korach is making the point, if no one is holy and that you need that one holy person, I understand the need for Moses. But if everyone is holy, if every Jew is holy, if every Jew is chosen, if every single Jew is part of the chosen people and called Mamleches Kohanim V'go Kadosh, then why do we need to have leadership? There shouldn't be any leadership. So where did Korach go wrong? The answer is in the second half of his challenge, when he said, why do you set yourself above the Lord's assembly? You see, Korach did not understand the role of Moses. He didn't understand the role of Aaron. When he said, why do you set yourself up above the Lord's assembly? That's where we know he had it all wrong. You see, his mistake was to see leadership in terms of status. A leader is one higher than the rest, right? The alpha male, the top dog, the controller, the director, the dominator, the one before whom people bow, right? The ruler, the commander, the king, the superior. That's what leaders in society mean. That's what that word leadership seems to mean in society. And that's what Korach is implying, that you, Aaron, and Moses grab that role of leadership. But that is not the leadership of the Torah. And the Torah has hinted this to us in so many ways. Moses never put himself above the people. In fact, the Torah will testify to us that he was a very humble man, more humble than anyone else on the face of the earth. So the Torah to tell us that the greatest leader we ever had was also the most humblest that ever walked the face of the earth. What is that telling us? This wasn't a leadership grab. This wasn't Moses seeking power over anyone. About Aaron, it tells us about his love for people and how he blessed people and how he tried to bring people together that were arguing. He didn't use power. He didn't use force. He used love. Think about it. Not the priests and not the prophets had any personal power or authority. They didn't have a police force. What were they? They were transmitters of words. The prophet spoke. He wasn't speaking his words. The prophet was a vehicle to deliver God's words to the people. He spoke the word of God of that particular time. The priest spoke the word of God. As I open with the Birchat Kohanim, I didn't write the prayer. I don't have the ability to bless anyone. I wish I did. All I can do is say, this is what God told me to say to you. It's God that's giving you the blessing. He asked it that it go through me. Okay, I'll do it. I'm not seeking power over you by saying, I can bless you. You don't have that ability. We each have the ability to bless each other. These are the words that God told the Kohen to tell over to the other people. That's why humility was not an accident of the personalities of Moses and Aaron or of all the prophets. It was the essence of their role. Without that humility, they could not be who they were. Even the slightest hint that they were exercising their own authority, speaking their own word, or doing what they own, their own deed, invalidated them. Even a king, by the way, in Jewish law, which does have authority and does have power, even the king, we're talking about leaders of Moses and Aaron's status and prophet status, but even if you looked at a king, the Torah goes ahead and says he must be humble. It doesn't mean it always worked out that way. We had some kings that were not so humble and were quite cruel, but he's supposed to be humble to the point that he's supposed to always carry a Torah scroll with him, and he's supposed to read from this Torah scroll all the days of his life. So that, as the Torah says, so that he may learn to revere the Lord his God and follow carefully all the words of the law, so that the king will always know I'm not above the law. I have to follow the Torah and there's a king above me. In Judaism, leadership is not a matter of status, but a matter of function. A leader is not one who holds himself higher than the other person. The absence of hierarchy does not mean the absence of leadership. Think about it. An orchestra does a lot better when there's a conductor. A play needs a director. A team needs a captain. A leader's role is to coordinate. The leader in the Jewish way of thinking is to be the coordinator, to give structure, to give shape, to make sure that we're all following the same script, that we're all traveling in the same direction. The leader in Jewish understanding, the Moses leader, the prophet leader, has to have vision and he has to be able to communicate this vision. Without leadership, even in the most glittering array of talents, produces not music, but noise. If everyone is on stage with their instrument and they all decide they want to write their own music, you don't have a symphony. No one is paying to hear that. It's just noise. Judaism says we need an orchestra leader, a humble one that knows how to bring out the best of every instrument and the best of every musician. As it is written, in those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. It says in the Judges that sometimes if there is no king and everyone does what they want, you have chaos. It would be nice if everyone knew what to do on their own and didn't need a leader. But we don't have that. If we each just did what we want, we would end up with chaos. The Torah has this marvelous, memorable way of putting this. Moses' highest honor. What is he called? What is the name that the Torah calls Moses that gives him the highest honor? He's called Eved Hashem, the servant of God. If he was the leader of ego, that would not be the greatest title to have, that you're a servant. But for Moses, the greatest title he can ever earn, Eved Hashem. So when God wants to eulogize Moses, he says, servant of God. What name do we call Moses? What do we call him by? We don't call him Moses, our leader. We call him Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, our teacher. Of all the words that we could have used about leadership, we chose the word teacher, because that's what he was first and foremost. And that's where Korach got it wrong. See, the leader is a servant, and he's there to lead, to serve us. Anything else is not leadership as Judaism understands it. Note, of course, we're all God's servants. The Torah tells us we're all God's servants. So it's not just that Moses was the only servant, but Moses was the perfection of being God's servant. Moses was the role model of being God's servant. And if we put Moses in that leadership position of Moses, who he was, we will all learn from him that element of humility, that if someone as great as Moses is still so obedient to God, so respectful of God, so loving of God, Eved Hashem, and that's the way we should be. In Judaism, a leader is a servant of God. He's not the servant of the people, nor is he their master. Only God is the master. He's not above the people. He and they are equal. He is their teacher, their guide, their advocate. And with Moses, most important, he is their defender. His task is to remind them endlessly of their job, of their role, and inspire them to be true to it. It's interesting. A true leader of the Jewish people never wanted the job. Moses didn't want it. None of them wanted it. None of the great prophets wanted it. Almost without exception, the great leaders of all of Torah and of all of Jewish history were reluctant to assume the mantle of leadership. Rabbi Gamliel sums it up when he says to the two sages that he wanted to appoint to office. He says, do you imagine I'm offering you rulership? I'm offering you avdut, the chance to serve. This is not about power. That's the mistake of Korach. Korach thought of leadership like the rest of the world thinks of leadership, like you're campaigning for a position and you have to tell everyone, I am the greatest. He thought leaders were those who set themselves above the congregation. He was right to say that there's no place in Judaism of hierarchy, that we're all to be God's servants. But without the leadership of Moses, we don't get there. We need that leadership. It's interesting that this is the portion we read this week. Today is a day after the 3rd of Tammuz, the 26th yard site of our leader, of the Moses of our generation. And think of the parallel of humility, of a man that didn't want the job, of a man that every single day spent his life caring about us, worrying about us, trying to inspire us. Think about this. The Rebbe had no power. He had no authority over us. He had no police force to enforce any of his ideas. The Rebbe didn't own property. He didn't own possessions. He didn't have a police force. He didn't have anything. All he had was what? His love and his voice, his inspiration. And that's what lives on. That's what we remember most about Moses and about Aaron and about Isaiah, their word and their love. How much they cared for us and how much they inspired us. Think about this, my closing thought. In his lifetime, the Lubavitcher Rebbe was clearly the most influential Jewish human being on the face of the earth. It's 26 years later. And tell me, who is the most influential Jew on the face of the earth today? It is still the Lubavitcher Rebbe. 26 years later, there is not a single individual, not a single Jewish individual on the face of the earth that still today inspires the mass amounts of people, the millions of people that are inspired by his teachings, by his words, by his life legacy. Years after. That's the Jewish definition of a leader. He didn't need the force. He didn't need the power. He needed to inspire us. He needed to love us. He needed to embrace us. And we have not forgotten. And we continue to respect this legacy, and we continue to study from this legacy and live our lives according to this legacy. And let us hope any day soon that the Rebbe's ultimate mandate to this generation, to be the generation to bring about the coming of Mashiach Tzedkenu, is something that we're able to see in reality, not just on paper, not just in philosophy, not just in the books, not just as a blessing that we conclude every one of our talks, but indeed that we go ahead and we see the Geula Amitus V'Hashlema. We see another great leader, the leader of Elijah, come, also a leader similar to the leaders we spoke about, and blows that shofar and tells us it's time for all of us to go home, to move to Jerusalem. Don't worry, your houses will fly along with you, all your possessions will go with you, but we'll live in Jerusalem, we'll have the Beis HaMikdash, and we'll have the ultimate Geula. It should happen speedily in our days. A good Shabbos to everyone. As I wrote in my email today, the shul is open tonight, 7 o'clock for evening services. Tomorrow there'll be 2 services. There'll be an outdoor 8:30 service, and there'll be the regular indoor 10 o'clock service. And so we look forward for those that feel up to coming and you're safe to come. Please do join us. We do follow all social distancing rules. A good Shabbos to everybody.